Hi Flosstube, it's time for another Travels with Tricia, and this time I am in Litchfield, Connecticut at the Litchfield Historical Society, here to see an exhibition which is open until December 1st, 2024 with their busy needles. The majority of the samplers in the exhibition are actually owned by a very gracious collector who is meeting us inside the exhibition to talk about the samplers. So let's get in the backpack and let's go inside. So here I am with Alexandra Peters.
Hello.
Hello. And Alexandra, can you tell everybody where we are?
We're in Litchfield, Connecticut, which is in the northwest corner in Litchfield County, and we're at the Litchfield Historical Society and Museum.
And this is an exhibit of samplers. Some from your collection?
Yeah, there are 25 from my collection, and I'm not even sure how many, maybe 15 or 12 from Litchfield's collection. And Litchfield, as you know, has an extraordinary collection. Litchfield is one of the most important museums for samplers, and always has been.
Mm-hmm. And that's because the Litchfield the Litchfield Academy
Right.
was here in town.
Exactly. Sarah Pierce's Academy was the sort of one of the premier boarding schools at the time. And boarding in this, if you wanted to go to a school, most of America was very rural until the mid 1800s. So if you wanted to if you were a girl in your teens, unless you happened to live near a school, you went to a boarding school if you were doing the kind of work. If you were lucky enough to be a teenager whose parents could afford to send you to school, right, which not very many were.
Well, before we take a look at some of the amazing Litchfield Academy samplers that are right in front of us right now, let's make sure to tell everybody about the catalog to the exhibition.
So this is a catalog I created, and it's only of my samplers, and it's, I'm not even sure how many pages, maybe 60, and it describes all the samplers that are here. And it is available here at Litchfield Historical Society. If you go on their website, they'll send it to you. Or you can also find it on my website, Alexandra Peters. So here I am.
Fabulous. So I'm going to put in the links below, I'm going to put the links so how people can get the catalog, whether it be from your site or from the Litchfield Historical Society.
My site will just send it to them too, because I'm just giving it to them. So.
But the cool thing also is that while we've been here today, I've picked up 4 copies to give away to people who join the mailing list while watching this video, and I will pick it at random. And I also picked up 2 copies of the Litchfield Historical Society book on the Litchfield Academy samplers as well.
And that book, I can tell you, had a profound influence on me. I'm very moved to be here having my samplers in this venerable place, because that book was from a sampler show that was, maybe 20 years ago, I don't really remember. And I have read it cover to cover a number of times. Its style is a little more old-fashioned, but it's so packed with information. It's a wonderful resource. It's also got a list of all the girls who attended and all sorts of and fantastic bibliographies. So anybody interested in these things, that's a great resource too.
So Alexandra, can you tell me about this particular coat of arms?
Well, this sampler was made by a girl named Lucy Church, and it says by the name of Church, which you would think is about a church, but no, it's her family name. And this is the Church family sampler, which coat of arms, which if I had to choose one, I would definitely choose these 4 greyhounds looking to the left. I think it's a really cool coat of arms. And American girls, these were taken from the British, but American girls really loved them too, and used them. They're only, this area, this is from Miss Patton's school, which is here in Connecticut, and maybe some schools in Boston, girls did them too. What's interesting about it, I don't, just from my own research, is that I think it's very likely that these were families who were not that happy about the revolution. We assume everybody was delighted that there was a revolution, but as is always the case, there were some who were and some who weren't. And so doing a coat of arms was something that harkened back to the past and said, we're from the past, we're not, we want to keep those old ways. It's got fantastic, well,
Absolutely fantastic silk work on this piece.
yes, exactly. Amazing silver and gold and beautiful, very simple background that must have been hard to work on because it's just this creamy colored silk may have been lighter once, but I don't know that it was that much lighter because there's a nice contrast between the flowers and the silk background.
Yeah, have you been able to see the back of it to see whether or not some of these roses were a darker pink?
Yes, and they were a little darker, but not that much.
Really?
This was, I would say, this had a muted look to it all along. And this style with this is an eagle, even though it's got a kind of a dove-like look to it. This style and the swag and the sheaf of wheat here and leaves coming up like this. This is typical of Miss Patton's school, so it's a particularly nice one, I think.
Yes, you know, all the Boston ones, often they're on the diagonal, and the hatchment has I don't know what we would call them, all the curly cues coming off of them, not floral.
Exactly.
More like big leaves.
Exactly.
And they are very obviously professionally drawn to fill the space well.
Right.
And these ones have just a different look to them.
Those to me seem more masculine. This is actually quite
true.
a feminine looking one, isn't it? And it's, I think these were often presented to the father because if a girl does this, she's likely going to be married in 3 or 4 years.
True.
And so this is going to stay with her family, maybe, but I think that was often the case.
Is that a velvet ribbon in the
Yes,
center?
it is velvet.
Oh my goodness, look at that.
And actually, I did kind of rub it a little bit. I cleaned my fingers first, right? Exactly. I did touch it to see. I didn't mean rub it. You would not want to rub things on here, but it's textured. And the whole thing has the border has sort of a texture to it.
Right. Well, what's wonderful about this, we were talking about this before we started filming, is that the silver has this interesting quality to it, the silver threads, and we were discussing about whether or not they had been a little bit treated by the embroiderer to give this incredible shaded effect. It's really stunning.
And it is a little bit 3D in real life. That I don't know how to explain that other than you can see that it's not lying. This is not flat.
Yeah, there's paddedness to it.
Yes.
And what I love about this is that you've had it framed so excellently for YouTube here because there's absolutely no reflection in this glass.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
I may have to find out about your framer.
I care very much about having things properly taken care of because I feel like these are my girls.
Yes.
And they've survived a long time. They need to survive for the next few hundred years at least, I hope. But it's a very costly enterprise to take care of samplers properly.
It really is. So Alexandra, you have a small grouping here shown in the museum, you just told me, of pieces by a family that is quite notable. Let's talk about the 3 here.
Well, these are from the family of Nathaniel Hawthorne. Nathaniel Hawthorne, the amazing writer who wrote The Scarlet Letter, which most of us have read, and many other wonderful books. And The Scarlet Letter is a book about a woman who was a needleworker who was forced to wear a scarlet A for adulteress because she had given birth to a baby. She was married, but her husband was away, so they knew he wasn't the father. It's a fantastic book. I just read it recently, and it really holds. I mean, it's so amazing. It was historical at the time it was written. He was writing it about 100 years he was writing it about a time 100 years earlier. So Nathaniel Hawthorne was very influenced by needlework. He describes the Scarlet A as having a gorgeous luxuriance, and it had gold and red, and it was not a timid little thing. She was definitely putting it out there that she was not hiding that she was an adulteress, quite the reverse. And needlework comes up all the time in the book. It's a very powerful part of it because she earns her living as a needleworker.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah, and that in fact is how she was able to go back into town and into people's houses, because she was doing needlework for them. So Nathaniel Hawthorne's father died when he was 4. He was a sailor, and he died at sea. And so his mother moved back into her family home with Nathaniel and his 2 sisters. And it's a famous house. It's in Salem, Massachusetts, and it's very crowded, because life was very, very crowded then. Everybody lives, many people to a bedroom or whatever, but add 3 more people, it was pretty tight. Around him, he would have had women doing needlework all the time. And he would have grown up with a lot of these samplers on the wall. So I found one by a girl named Manning a few years ago that said somewhere on it that she was connected to Nathaniel Hawthorne. I think she's a second cousin. But so I had the name Manning in my head, and I saw these samplers come up at different auctions. But some of them have this nice lemon yellow frame, and some of them didn't. But I started madly researching them, and they're all members of his family. They're numbered on the back, so I know there's a few more out there.
Really?
But I have about 10, I think, and there's 3 shown here. This is Miriam Lord, is his grandmother, and it is her. Miriam Lord Manning was her married name, and it is her house that he moved into. Rebecca Dodge Burnham is his cousin, and this is her mother. And this is a particularly lovely one, 1782. But Miriam Lord is also this. Her sampler was 17. Oh, what year was that? I think it's on here somewhere. I want you to note also that it's got a crown on it, which would make you think that it's British, but until 1776, girls considered themselves to be British subjects of the crown. So it's very common for samplers to have a crown. And a lot of them are more like this. This is pretty good color. This is great color. And this is the smallest Aglamise frame around a sampler that I've seen. I don't know if you have. A Glamise frame is a reverse painted, it's painted black on the other side. Right. So people thought these were very valuable, they thought samplers generally were really valuable and important in a way that we almost don't understand now, because we tend to devalue in our society the work of women. But they didn't then. They took this really seriously.
So the frame itself and with the sampler in it is then assumed to be of the period, earlier period, whereas the ones below are modern frames.
Yes, exactly.
Right, so that one may have actually been hanging.
Right.
In the home. And
these probably were hanging. They were his cousins, who were born in around 1820s or whatever, lived to be almost 100. So they lived into the early 1900s. They did 2 cousins who didn't marry, and they kept them all together. And I think that's often the case, that it's somebody who didn't marry or who keeps them. And they were clearly hung somewhere where there was a lot of light damage that occurred.
I find Rebecca's interesting because of the stitches at
Yeah,
the
it's
bottom
fantastic
here.
work that she did.
It's really
there.
interesting. We do a lot of these kind of pulled thread stitches today on samplers that we might want to do, and to see it on a piece from the 1800s is really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And I wish, I don't know what color they originally were. Mm-hmm. Things tend to fade to this greeny blue. And I have not opened up the back of these.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, they look like they may have been conservation framed.
Yes,
so
I think they have.
Not worth it. So you said about the numbers on the back. So whoever had them framed kind of did 1, 2, 3?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And they may well have been exhibited somewhere because it has that look to them. There's not much. I did all the research and tying them together, and then there were a couple more that came with them that I think the auction just, auctions will often sell 3 things together that are unrelated. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the auction is something that is related, so you got to really work.
So frustrating. They're always put on auction for the sale.
Yeah, exactly. And people, whoever is doing it at the auction is doing it quickly. Then they had different names on them. This is Lord, this is Dodge, this is Burnham. So you wouldn't necessarily think, unless you started working, that they were all connected. And then, as I said, the other tip-off was some of them had similar frames. But once I started working, I knew what their names were and connected them together. No, actually, Rebecca is his aunt, not his cousin. And so he knew these people really well. His grandmother, Rebecca, and her mother. He spent a lot of time in the home of his aunt. Because he didn't have a father, his uncle was like a father to him. So I think they're wonderful and fantastic. Actually, at the same auction, her Miriam Lord's wedding dress was sold, and I really thought about it. I thought, oh, it's fantastic, dark blue, beautiful dress. And I thought about buying it, and then thought, what am I going to do with it? Where am I going to hang Miriam Lord's wedding dress, which very luckily was bought by a famous textile place, whose name now eludes me, brainworm, in Sharon, Connecticut, where I live also, and she sold it to Deerfield. So it's now in the museum, which I'm very glad about. Miriam, we're taking care of you. Don't worry.
Well, this is really interesting. It's just in the last year I've started to see larger groupings recognized, family groupings recognized. And actually in Concord, Massachusetts, there was an exhibit earlier this year.
Oh, I saw it, yeah.
And yes, and the whole wall was a particular author's female relatives as well through her family.
I know.
Which was fabulous.
Yes.
The connection of we're starting to really connect these embroidered pieces with the larger history.
With history, exactly.
Yeah.
And realize that, for a male author, he was so used to seeing women around him sewing, the same way people who were used to seeing people around us on cell phones or whatever, that this was an ordinary part of life. And also a way he really understood the power of the needle, that women really have a way of supporting themselves, but that this is their work, and that they contributed. I mean, textiles underpinned the American economy so greatly that was part of the reason why we had a revolution, so that we didn't have to pay import duties. And
yes, coming from Massachusetts, which was a enormous hotbed of textiles, I very familiar.
Yeah, exactly. This is made by Lydia Hanson, who is known as Lydy or Liddy, and she was born in 1722, and she lived to be 102 years old. And when I was researching her, I kept coming across things that said, this is a mistake. She could not have lived until 1824. She did. She was celebrated as a centenarian.
Oh, that's fabulous.
And which nowadays there's more and more. I think I just read somewhere that there's something like almost close to 1 million people who are over 100 in the United States. But at that time, I know, isn't that amazing? At that time, she would have been one of a real minority. If you survived childbirth and you survived epidemics and you didn't, whatever other diseases, people did live well into their 70s and 80s a lot of the time. But 102 is pretty amazing, because also what it means is that here we are with the crowns again. In 1722, she was the subject. She was an American girl, but she was the subject of England, of the king, and this band style sampler is typical of that time and looks very British, actually.
Yes.
And I love this. Let your light so shine, which is from the Bible, of course.
Your good work and praise you.
Yep. And she did this in 1734, and the colors are still really good. And what I'm really fascinated by is sort of at the time she did this, America was so rural. She was really everybody was very spread out, but growth was just exponential. So when she did this, the population of the United States was 500,000. 100 years later, when she died, it was 10 million, which is really, so she lived through a tremendous change. And she said, I read that they asked what was her secret to her longevity. She said, well, I walk 5 miles to church every day, which actually walking 5 miles was not as amazing then as it is now, because you wanted to get anywhere, you walked. And if you're used to walking, you're used to doing that. So, okay, maybe it was going to church, maybe it was the walking, but she...
It's too bad that she didn't say, and having a bourbon.
Or how about I stitched every day?
Yes.
Well, so, and this is beautifully done. I haven't found much information about who her family was, but somebody was really teaching her to do complex things. Here's the British lion with a crown that is typical of...
And now she's from Dover, New Hampshire.
Yes.
Right? Right. And how did you find that this was actually an American piece versus, because I mean, if I saw this randomly on an auction market, I'd be like, English.
Yeah, so what I do when I see one that I like is, before I buy it, I really research it. And a lot of the time, it'll pop up right away. I think she did, because of her unusual history of living so long. And it's actually almost easier to research American ones than British ones. There's a lot more, I look for... I just put it on a search, and sometimes that'll come up, but mostly I can find it on Ancestry or other genealogical sites and look for her, baptismal date, her birth date, her marriage, and then sometimes, it's just so much fun doing this sort of research, because you sometimes go, it doesn't come up immediately, but so a lot of times I research girls for a couple of hours and then decide, no, this is, well, I love English ones, I have a lot of English ones too, but this jumped out at me almost immediately as American, and then I was able to find so much information about her that...
that it told you what it was.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So it wasn't part of the auction record at the time?
No, it was
look
not.
At that, a centenarian
I
that has
know.
been dug up from the past.
I love it. I love whenever I can find things that mostly I don't find, there's not that information. A lot of time it's just downright wrong, which is great. Okay, it's too bad for the collectors, for the field, that there's so much misinformation.
Yeah.
But auctions don't have time. I understand that. I understand how auction houses work, that they don't have time to do a lot of research. And if it has gone through, if it has provenance, like it's been sold at Sotheby's or Christie's or owned by a famous collector or deaccessioned from a museum, something like that. Yeah, but mostly they aren't.
Well, and you look at pieces in museums, and often they just have not had time. It hasn't
Absolutely.
been on exhibition. They haven't had time to research it. And truthfully, as we all well know, we haven't had access to this kind of archival information digitally until just recently.
Just recently. The internet has changed everything. When you think about Betty Ring, who was the great collector who created the book that, two huge, fantastic volumes that I just love to read, Girlhood Embroidery. She went from town to town, looking at libraries and historical societies and talking to people and following up on things. There was no internet then, and she did it all. I don't even understand how she could possibly have done that.
I don't either.
It's amazing.
It's like she had a card catalog in her head.
Yeah.
And then to organize everything, and just an incredible work.
Right.
And I found that archives during COVID had the downtime, if you want to say that, because they weren't pulling records for people. They had the downtime to actually put things online or link things together that haven't been. And so really post-COVID has been an explosion
of new information, and connections made, right.
And so you have to actually go back to things you may have researched before.
And bearing in mind that depending on when the museum or whatever it is acquired them, the information may not be quite right. That now we would be able to access a lot of these. I never assume they're correct. If I'm really researching, I go a little deeper and often find that it's not that they're wrong, it's that they didn't have time to really access and go into it.
And they didn't have the resources.
No,
that
exactly.
We have, in the last year or two.
Yeah, or even the past 20 years in terms of really having the internet or genealogical sites or the ability to access to go deep into people's wills. Like we were just talking about wills, which I love to read. You find out really amazing stuff looking at people's
I
wills.
That I don't really finally identify somebody until I've been through the wills.
Yeah.
Because that's where you start finding out that there was 2 women of the same name, or that they were definitely married to this other individual. Because sometimes especially in England, some information was destroyed in the Blitz.
Yes, absolutely.
So, there could be little holes.
But the
wills often exist.
But then sometimes other amazing pieces of information, and then extraordinary connections that will just happen, that I will happen to have been looking at a girl, and that so she's still in my memory, and then I'll find a sampler made by another girl somewhere where I'm like, wait, these are connected. They went, this is the same school, or this is the same town, or this is the same family even.
Yes.
Which just comes from doing it, more and more and more.
I think one thing we must actually mention is the debt of gratitude we have to the Mormon Church.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody knows that, that to them, the genealogical connections are incredibly important, and so they have an entire branch of the Mormon Church that scans the records that we might want to use from England, America, other countries, and gets them online.
And they're totally accessible. I have actually been to their center in Utah. And it's this huge library, and anybody can use it. And they're delighted to have. You can be in touch with them to correct information or add new information or whatever. It's really an extraordinary resource. I agree with you.
Can you imagine if the Mormon Church didn't have that?
No.
It's a very important piece.
Yeah.
How there's so many records we would not have.
We would not have that. Yeah, the other group I think about all the time is the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, because in order to join, you had to submit all sorts of levels of documentation that otherwise would not have been. I don't know how you would have found that. Yes, exactly.
Those random pieces of paper in your household that don't end up in historical
Exactly,
societies.
and so there you can make amazing connections that. If they're wrong, unfortunately, sometimes with any of these things, if it's wrong, it persists and it keeps showing up. But mostly, never mind that. The fact that we have these things is just fantastic.
Yeah. But I think the moral of this story is that because of this information that's coming digital, is becoming digitized and connected of late, is that there is going to be amazing scholarship which will actually rewrite a lot of needlework history coming up and coming out, I think, in the next 10 years.
And that, I agree with you, and that means it's going to rewrite the history of women, too, because we have never understood societally the value and importance of the contributions of women, and which I think people did probably until the Industrial Revolution, when everybody went to work in a factory and women got paid less and still do. But so but until that time, you saw women working around you all the time. Everybody understood what women's work was and how necessary it was, because everybody wore clothing. Not everybody slept probably on sheets, but at anything or any bag you carried, anything, the shroud people were buried in, whatever clothing was made by women.
Right.
And
we also don't really think about the fact that there was no social safety net either.
Right.
And so when a man died in his 50s, somebody had to pick up and feed the family.
Exactly.
Take over the business. Often take over his
Very
business.
often,
and
yes.
Run his business.
Even with lots of kids running around. And the reverse too, when a woman died, men married really fast, because they could not run a household and do everything that was needed to be done.
There's too much labor to be done.
Yeah, and so they very often actually married their wife's sister. I keep coming up with this all the time. Well, she would be the woman who would be in the household, taking care of her sister and her sister's children, and she and the husband would have a more intimate isn't the right word, but they'd be more connected, close than he would ordinarily with other women. So, okay, there you go. So, because it's confusing a lot of the time. I'm like, wait, was he married to her? I was married to her. I'm like, sisters, right? It's like, and one died. So, the importance of this work just can't be underestimated, and it is.
It is completely underestimated.
Yeah, and just the fact that samplers, to begin with, this is an enormous amount of work, an enormous amount of money spent on this linen, and then the silk that was used to embroider with, even the needles, that these are very unusual because most textiles are made to be used. They might have hung. We have a bunch of things that have survived because they were bed hangings or curtains or whatever. These were never intended to be used. They were meant to be displayed, which is why most of them have survived. But it also means that they were highly valued. This is something people thought was really important, and families wanted to show off what their daughters could do. And I hear this thing all the time of, oh, it was used to show off to a prospective husband, and I'm like, I don't think so. I think that these women almost all married at 20. It's quite amazing. 20-year-old woman, she's not saying, look at my sampler. She's looking pretty, and they're doing what people do. And it's probably similar. I mean, I've heard people say, oh, this is like a diploma, only indirectly, because but it's a way of like, if you have your diploma, if you're hanging in your house, that it's not what your prospective suitor would say, can I see your diploma? But you know you're the kind of family who sent your kid to a college, and so it's sort of,
I've been educated.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
And it also is about literacy.
Right.
This is a highly literate girl.
Yes.
I can move on to another one that is another band sampler. So this is a band sampler, that long style again, and this is an American girl, Sarah Samson, and who was from Dartmouth, Massachusetts, and her grandfather came over, her great-grandfather came over on the Mayflower. So what I really love about this is we think that women, anonymous was a woman. Well, you know what? These girls were signing their names. They often put their not only their names, but the time, the place. And so Sarah could write her name with a needle. Yep. And Sarah's grandfather, in his will, and he died, I'm trying to remember, maybe 30 years before this, he just made a mark with an X. Mm-hmm. So this girl, we think women weren't literate. In fact, most women were, by 1800, most women were literate, could read, which isn't always the same thing as being able to write, but they certainly could read. But if they were doing samplers, they could write, and they could write their name. They could do it in different ways. I always like to say, but again, we got the crowns here because she was a subject of England, and these are Solomon's porches, which are just a little decorative figure that we're not quite sure why they're around everywhere. And here you can see women this is how they carried water on the pail over their shoulders, which was so ordinary then that now nobody knows what this is. But it's retained a lot of color, and she was part of this whole, girls were now claiming themselves, and this began in the 1600s, but the earliest one we know of, or that has survived, is in England, is Jane Bostock from 1598. And in the United States, you can see Laura Standish's sampler, which is in the Plymouth Museum, I think.
Yes.
And somewhere around in the 1640s, she did that. And her father, Miles Standish, came over on the Mayflower, too. So these are very early American families, and look how well educated this girl is and how complex
Well, I'm stunned
her
by,
work
and
is.
love to have you put your finger near it again, is the scale of this embroidery. Look at how tiny that is. And you can see her name there, Sarah.
Sarah Samson. I don't have that
A little
glasses
bit farther, right there, Sarah.
Here she is,
Blue,
Sarah Samson, my name. And with my needle, wait, let me put my glasses on, that would help. I wrought the same.
Yeah.
And
how old was she there? Says something years old.
yeah.
Can't really. Maybe 10? I don't know. can't see it.
Yes, I think she is 10 years old.
Yes.
And 10 years old is always, that is the age I just pick randomly because to start with when I'm searching a girl. So
Yeah, I do too, about 10 to 12.
mhm.
Yes. Yes, this is wonderful.
My all-time favorite piece.
This is your all-time favorite
Yes,
piece?
it is. I love family registers, and so I was very excited when I saw this at an auction, and it was labeled as a Connecticut sampler, which I actually thought it was a Massachusetts sampler, but now I would recognize it immediately as it's a Maine sampler.
Maine.
Yeah.
Brunswick, Maine.
And there were a number of schools in Portland, Maine in particular, girls' schools and this is a very, very typical style with the way it's framed, and this format of having it be laid out. Some of them have houses and things. This one just has a couple of beautiful little willow trees, typical on. This is also is a bit of a morning sampler. But what's amazing about this, when I started looking it up, is my husband was sitting in the next room, and I researched them before I buy them. And I called out to him, wait, this girl, it says C-O-L, and he's like, uh-huh. And I said, no, honey, this girl, wait. And I'm zipping through, and I said, it says Negro on the top of her parents' birth certificate. So it's everything I found. This is a free black girl. And we have so little material culture from free blacks of that time. And
This is pre-Civil War.
yes, this is probably, I don't know exactly when it was made, but the sister who died in 1829, so it's very likely to have been made 1830, 1831. And it looks like that period too. And there were, in Maine, which is one thinks of it as a very white state, but there was quite a large group of black people who lived around the Brunswick and Portland area. And this is the mother, Mehitable Griffin, born in 1781. She married William Swain in 1800. He was born in 1774. And they had 4 children, and then William died before the youngest was born. And Mehitable must have been a wonderful woman, because very quickly she married Francis Houston. And almost immediately had another child with him. There's only 2 years between the birth of Frances Swain and John Houston, her first child with Francis Houston. Francis Houston was a really powerful person in their community. Perhaps Mehitable was too, but he was the one typically written about. And her family had been there for a couple of generations. They owned land. Francis and Mehitable bought a lot more land. Everybody around there was a seafarer in the maritime business. About 30%, 25 to 30% of men at sea were black at that time, because it was safe. Once you were out there on the boat, you were okay. Until the Irish began to immigrate to the United States, because they then became the mariners. And black people then began to work on the railroads as the railroads were starting. And we all have that image of a conductor who's black, or they were in food service industries. But at this time, Francis, the father, Francis Houston, probably called Frank in real life, was a mariner and a farmer, and a man who was revered. There are 2 different obituaries about him when he died. Full of mistakes, but nonetheless, for a black man to have an obituary in white paper, and then a second one which corrected some of the first. And I found acknowledgments about him in writings, even a book written 10 years later, which mentioned this particular man. I mean, he's already dead. This is so wonderful, because look how beautiful it is with these lovely long stitches and how gorgeous the work is. I don't know where she learned to do this, and I really, really researched. I've been to Brunswick. I've read up on life there. I mean, I would love any information anybody might have, because people have said to me, well, why don't you just look up the schools that are there? Yeah, they were not likely having black girls with them. They're not the kind, this would have been done by, but this kind of work would have been done by a girl at boarding school, and or a school that her parents paid money to send her there. And there was social status involved with that too. You were the kind of family who can send your daughter there. Black girls did not typically attend, but...
Although there is an example actually in Concord, Mass.
Is there?
There is. I'll send you some information about it because you might be able to continue to dig more. But somebody who is so respected, it was possible.
How great.
Unusual,
Oh, yeah.
but possible.
Yeah. And she definitely went to school with a mixed school in sort of when she was younger, whichever girl this is. I'm not sure which girl it is.
It doesn't say.
It doesn't say which one. And here's what's funny too, you know, we do these contractions for like February, March. She did it with her siblings' names, her first names, and she did that because she laid it out there may not have been a teacher working with her at this point because she should have laid it out here, but she lost a little space here. And so this sister is Pamelia, but she writes P-A-M-E and then a little A. Rachel with a little L, Lydia, Mary, Octavia, and then, you know, Ezekiel, that's common, and that would be. And Pamelia died at age 19 in 1829. And what's amazing about this, too, is so Mehetable Griffin had 12 children. They all lived through infancy. This is the only sampler I've ever seen where, and I love family registers, where all the children survived functionally to adulthood. And this is wonderful because the assumption was, oh, black people, you know, they're all the nasty things people have thought about how they can't take care of themselves or whatever. No, they're raising their children beautifully
Well, they seem like that they were quite well off to have been able to send her to school, afford the silk like everybody else did, and you said mariners likely.
Yep, and farmers, and cared about literacy. There's a little church named after him in Brunswick, and there is the other thing that is extraordinary about these people is that they are acknowledged, Mehetable and Francis, to have been conductors on the Underground Railroad. And everybody's got a grandparent or been somewhere where they said, oh yeah, because the Underground Railroad was a way to pass freedom seekers from house to house on their way to Canada, generally for freedom. And so there was no railroad. It was called a railroad because they just couldn't understand. It moved so quickly that people assumed there must be some magical thing. But actually what it was people passing in secret. So we don't have records from it generally. But there is an organization that is trying to record this stuff, and it's the National Parks Service keeps records. And you have to give all sorts of documentation. We know for sure that they definitely helped people. One of the reasons that's kind of an odd one is that they took in a young woman, Clara Baptiste, who after Mehetable died in 1850, he married Clara and had 4 more children with him, or maybe 5, it's not really quite clear. But she wrote, she was interviewed later in life and said, yes, they rescued her. She came north with her family to whom she was a nanny, and she escaped. They helped her escape because she knew she was pregnant, and she knew that once she gave birth, she would not actually have the say over what happened to her child. So she had to get out and so that child grew up in this household. And they are the only other people acknowledged in Maine to have been part of the Underground Railroad are Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, which, definitely. And she also lived in Brunswick, which was where Bowdoin College is, there was a lot of abolition work around there. And then the Abyssinian Church, which is the first or maybe the second Black church in the United States, and that's in Portland, actually. And Maine is just below Canada, so if you could get to Maine, and people got there by boat, if you could get on a boat and get to to Boston, to Portland, to Brunswick, you were not that far from, you could walk to Canada, as opposed to walking all the way north from southern states with all the attendant danger there. So this just moves me so much. So there is a burying ground in Maine, then that is listed as the, that's what the National Park Service lists.
The Houston burying ground.
Burying ground, yeah. It's on private land. I have photographs of it. I know just where it is, but I can't get in there. And I know where it is, like within sort of a 1 mile area. So again, if anybody knows how I can, I would love to just take photographs of the headstones. I have photographs, but they're 20, 30 years old. They're kind of grainy. So, but most of the family, many of the family are buried there. And the other thing, wonderful thing, I mean, there's this family, there's so much about them. Mary, born in 1816, got married at 16 to a man who wrote a book on on the history of Black people, and it's still in print. I've bought it several times, and with different covers, and they were a family who were accustomed to being around literate, intelligent, educated people, because he was an extraordinarily intelligent, literate man, and married her when she was 16. They had a lot of children, like 10 children or something. People had a lot of children at that time, and they all have names from antiquity and literature. And so this was not just a little simple, I mean, they were in one way because they're farmers and whatever, but they were people who expected to be out in the world doing, important things. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if they knew Harriet Beecher Stowe and worked with her. And but it's fantastic, and
an amazing piece of American history through a sampler. The last Flosstube that I did at DAR, had some of these unusual sampler makers, whether it be boys or girls in Hawaii in missionary schools. Mm-hmm. And so we can't just walk up to a sampler and just assume anymore.
Exactly. And I wonder how many there are, because if you see a family register, you're like, oh, I know who the people are. Their names, and I didn't know where they were from, but actually start digging deeper. There's more and more and more and more about this family that has been so much fun. It's to dig into and to know, to try to figure out who they were in the world, what their place was. And it's not quite what we think, because they were in fact living I don't know, would you call it a middle class life? With clearly their daughter is going to, whichever daughter it was, is pretty likely to be Mary, but it could also have been Octavia. It's also possible, it might have been Rachel herself who started it, and then a sister finished it, another sister finished it. But in any case, one of these daughters made this fantastic thing, which is huge. I just want to show you how big it is comparatively. It's twice the size of most samplers.
Rightfully so, the family was proud.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, they were. That's right. And we actually don't know Francis Houston's history. There's a lot of misinformation there about him, because one of the obituaries said he had been born in Nantucket. I have found absolutely no proof of this. And it also says he fought in the Civil War. That's in the Revolutionary War. That's not possible. He wasn't old enough.
I see that.
He
did other wonderful things.
Right, but so maybe some member of his family did, but it's very possible that he was a freedom seeker himself, that's the term we use now for escaping, for fugitive slaves or whatever, because it's more respectful. It's not drawing attention to slavery first. And he met a woman who was really rooted. She had a very large family. Most people who are Black, obviously intermarried. They're a very large group of several hundred of them. and who had a big respected role in the town of Brunswick.
Fabulous.
Let me know when you're ready.
Right. Yeah, so there's beautiful darning samplers and Quaker pieces here.
Yeah, these two are by the same girl, Keziah Burrow, and she went to the Westtown School in, is it in Chester, Pennsylvania? Yeah, Chester County, Pennsylvania, where Quaker girls did amazing needlework, and most girls at Westtown did a darning sampler, an extract, and another type. These are based on, they modeled themselves on the Ackworth School in England, Westtown, and they have extraordinary needlework. The Quakers believed that girls should be taught as the same thing boys were, although I don't know that girls got more than boys. I'm always sorry, because girls got this fantastic creative outlet and something that they were great at doing. Then I think boys did, drawing and I'm not sure what else, but girls were doing this stuff all the time. And really enjoying it. There's something, I think it's maybe in Mary Brooks's book about Westtown, where one of the girls talks about how we all went outside so we could work on our samplers together during our break,
nice.
Which it surprises people, because they think girls were forced to do this, but no, girls loved doing this. It was wonderfully relaxing. It releases dopamine. Westtown changes its name a lot. It's called Weston sometimes and Westtown other times, but it is still in existence, and it is Westtown, one word, school. And this is the first one I bought, and I just love it, because look at these amazing things she's doing here with, weaving with a needle,
Right.
and very complex stitches. And on this thin, gauzy background.
It's a really high gauzy background for these darning patterns that she's put into this.
Which must
Really
have
lovely.
a lot of weight assumption. I mean, I assume this is your area of expertise, and this one is intended to. It's silk, but it's something you could fix wool with, because it looks like wool. So I love that so much, and then found this one by the same girl.
Isn't that amazing to find one by the same girl, not at the same time?
And actually, Amy Finkel, who the eminent sampler dealer, found it for me, because she knew I had this one. And this is typical also. This particular thing with this vine with a little bellflower here, you see that? It's
Right.
Quaker. And extract just means extract, like part of a poem or part of a saying. And they're very plain like this. I have several of these, and they're just with a poem, a part of a hymn, some sort of a quote. And this was part of what they did too. And her sister, her cousin, different members of her family all went to this school too. And then I gave a talk here, and which was online, and I said, I know there's a third one. If anybody knows where it is, well, Amy Finkel knew, so she called me, and she said, I can find that for you. I know where it is. So I got it, and here it is.
This is a surprise, folks.
Exactly.
The curator has brought it out of storage for us to see.
And so I brought it over to them here, and here it is.
Wonderful.
And these motifs are very Quaker, and this is an absolute mimicry of Ackworth School in England. And I don't know why they developed this particular thing, but it's a very pretty version of it. And I mean, one of the things I'm interested in is that a couple of things are upside down in here. I'm not sure why. But it's beautifully done, and I can show you the back. This, it says E.H. Haynes, 1864. That is not the maker, that is her granddaughter, I think. And it was framed on this piece of wood, which was conserved. You never want the linen touching the wood, of course, because of the lignins in the wood stain it and destroy it.
I see, so what the framer has done has placed the
Wood on the
back
outside.
so you can still keep it.
Right, exactly.
That's fabulous. What a great idea.
Yeah, really nicely done. So I'm so excited that Keziah, all 3 pieces of Keziah are together, which I don't think has probably happened since Keziah made them.
And you were saying, as well as the curator of at the Litchfield Historical Society here, is that it's going to be hung
Yes,
soon?
we're going to redo, this show went up in, when did it go up? May? Yeah. And we had decided when we hung it that we would shift things around halfway through. So actually, this is a little more than halfway, I think, but the show's going to be up until November 30th. And so we're going to change a few things, add a few things, and so these 3 will be reunited. And actually, that's really, I haven't looked at them, 3 of them together before. The linen is quite different on here from this. Both of these have this very fine, gauzy material, and this is a more solid woven linen, but they're lovely. So Keziah, here you are, all 3 of your pieces. And this is how they're storing it. Of course, I brought it over to them, and this is how they're keeping it. And
what a treat for everybody to be able to see that, who's come to the exhibition already, and those of us who are seeing this virtually. And I thank you so much, Alexandra, for coming to the museum when I could come to the museum, giving us a tour, and very much thank you for sharing your pieces with the world.
Oh, I'm so happy to be able to share them with people and share my, passion. Yeah, I love these things. I love these girls, and I think the work they did was so important and so beautiful. And we have to acknowledge and recognize. We really have to reframe our thinking about how much this has contributed, because it's not. When we think of history, we don't learn about what women were doing or what girls were doing. And look what they were doing. We have documentation of just what girls were doing and how much they knew, how intelligent they were, what they were planning to, what they were going to do with their lives. And
it's a piece of their intellectual life.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's wonderful. Thank you again.
Thank you for coming.
Gosh, I hope you enjoyed seeing the samplers of Alexandra Peters and talking to her about which ones she loves here at the Historical Society of Litchfield, Connecticut. Hopefully you can get to the exhibition, and if you can't, I'm glad you were able to get in the backpack and join us. And if you like this kind of content, please subscribe.